Welcome to Viva La Vulva, the podcast that explores and teaches about the goodness of the vulva. Here is your host, Dr. Cara Quant, an internal medicine doctor and advocate for female sexual health.
Honored to be here.
Thank you. So I want to just get right into it. What is the reason why we're having this discussion today? Well, the discussion was brought about by a statistic, a CDC statistic from 2020. It is the HIV surveillance report from 2020. And give you a little bit of information about that. In 2020, 30,000 people were received an HIV diagnosis in the United States. And of those 30,000 people, 12,000 of them were Black or African American. Now, of breaking that down further, Black and African American women aged 13 and above made up 13% of the female population. This is we're talking about within the United States, but accounted for 54% of diagnoses of HIV infection amongst women. 54%, over half. And that is more than white women, who make up 62% of the population, but only account for 24% of diagnoses. And even Hispanic, Latino women make up 17% of the female population and account for 17% of the diagnoses. So that was an astounding statistic. And I've heard this before in training in medical school and residency that, Black people have the highest rates of HIV, and even Black women have been at that high number for, I would say, quite a while. But just, putting out that this latest statistic from the CDC reconfirms the statistic from the past. And so I wanted to first ask the question, or just talk about PrEP and what is it? Give everyone a little bit of background about that. So PrEP, again, is pre-exposure prophylaxis. It is a medicine that can be taken either on a daily basis or injected once every 2 months or every 8 weeks. And it can reduce your risk of getting HIV by up to 99%, which is a pretty high and good rate of efficacy. So that is a little bit of information about PrEP. I'll get a little bit more into it, but I wanted to direct this next question to Nikole and give us a little bit of information about the history of PrEP, because we've had this conversation before, and you were telling me that, the research, who the research was on.
Right, exactly. So Dr. Carr, I'll kind of start back to the PrEP clinical trial revolution, where, and actually starting back to Truvada, right? So PrEP, the medication for PrEP is Truvada, which was ADA approved in 2004. Which is an antiviral medication that is used in patients who are HIV positive so that they become virally suppressed, right? And when a person is virally suppressed, it prevents them from it's, healthy for them as well, but it also prevents them from HIV transmission, right? And so Gilead, they held the patent to Truvada up until some recent years, and now there's a generic formula. Well, back in 2010, which was one of the first clinical trials, it was called IPREX. It was a global trial. It was the first clinical trial to establish Truvada, the efficacy of Truvada used as a daily pill to prevent HIV acquisition, specifically only amongst gay men and men who have sex with men. And so that was the first clinical trial amongst that particular group of people, and it's specifically white MSM, right? This was also a global study as well, but as you know, in different countries, not necessarily people have the privilege of identifying as MSM openly. Well, after the IPREX study, and they found that there was high efficacy in the daily medication of Truvada, there were several other large global studies or clinical trials to follow to determine the efficacy of PrEP in different populations. They did have a clinical trial to determine efficacy in people who inject drugs. In further years, around 2014, 2015, they did some open up the trials to heterosexual men and women. And they also did some clinical trials on heterosexual couples in which one partner was living with HIV and the other partner was not. And then they started to recruit more trans women. I do like to mention that even though the populations became more inclusive, there was still an underrepresentation of individuals who identified either as Black or African American descent. However, all of the subsequent studies after the IPREX study, they found that there was efficacy of PrEP about 92% if the adherence was a daily dose of PrEP at a minimum of 4 times a week. So it's 92% at 4 times a week. And of course, the efficacy increases the more adherent to that you are to the drugs. So after those major clinical trials, then scientists said, okay, how does this look like in the real world setting? So then we implemented a demonstration project. So some health departments, they were funded to conduct a PrEP demonstration project, again, which was designed to gain a better understanding of how PrEP looks like in the real world, hence outside of the controlled clinical trial. So from 2010 to 2016, I actually was one of the lead clinical research managers that was responsible for implementing the U.S. PrEP demonstration project. It took some time to develop protocols and so forth because we're going out into the real world to do these implementations. But in the U.S., we had 3 different sites, which was San Francisco City Clinic in San Francisco, Whitman Walker in DC, and then Miami-Dade County Health Department Clinic. And within those demonstration projects, we had the opportunity to, again, enroll more diverse individuals into the study. But again, there was still a representation of cisgendered women and underrepresentation of transgender women, specifically transgender women of color, and then Black folks, period. But with that said, the results of that demonstration project still showed that there was a high efficacy in reducing HIV acquisition, even in a real world setting. And so once all those clinical trials were presented to the FDA, these were profound findings, right? So FDA then approved PrEP for Truvada for use as PrEP in July of 2012. So that's when it rolled out to some of the major healthcare facilities, start to roll out PrEP, the health department, insurance, which, there was protocols in place to try to get insurance to cover it. It took some time. However, we're still in a place where, PrEP and a daily doses still have some challenges for people in certain lifestyles, right? So where we are now, we're in this phase of rolling out long-acting PrEP, injectable PrEP, which again can address some adherence issues for folks who have issues taking the pill every day. It also has injectable PrEP will have a huge impact on individuals who are unhoused, also individuals who either use or inject drugs, and are people who are in domestic violence situations, to people who fear recourse if someone finds their Truvada bottle, right? So researchers are exploring options of drug-infused vaginal rings, implants, of course, the injectable drugs as well. Although there are some clinics that are offering injectable PrEP now, it's not fully accessible to all. And so this is the place that we're in now, is rolling out multiple options that are conducive to the varying lifestyles.
Okay. Now, going back to your point of saying that in 2012, that's when Truvada was rolled out, and that's when it was rolled out to clinics or for people to access and take. Remember being in medical school and remember talking about PrEP, but the only people I remember talking about PrEP to prescribe to were MSM and transgender women. Like we never got information about, oh, hey, how about Black women, or how about like these other heterosexual women just in general, like why, or cisgender, why are we not giving that information out to the medical students and residents about prescribing to other demographics other than MSM transgender population?
Right.
But it was mainly because the studies.
Exactly. And also not just the studies and who enrolls in the study, but also HIV tests, right? So for an example, in San Francisco, if you identify as a straight heterosexual woman with one partner, they consider you as low risk, right? But you mentioned about those 12,000 women who are HIV positive in 2020, they also reported, most of those women reported one sexual partner. They're affluent Black women. And there are women who have not reported drug use. So what is the story behind that curve, right? Because what we think as medical professions, what risk is not applicable to these women, right? And so the other piece is, and I only can speak for the county in which I reside in, or work in, I should say, is that for HIV tests, because women were deemed as low risk, you couldn't just walk into an STD clinic and say, I want an HIV test. I would have to tell, when I was working in the community, I would have to tell my clients, like, hey, when you go to the clinic, tell them you either have a partner that just got out of prison, or tell them that your partner told you that they're also MSM. And that's how they got an HIV test. But yet we recommend MSM communities, it's normalized for them to get tested. There's no stigma around getting tested every 3 months. We didn't have that same protocol. We're just now trying to create this protocol for cis women now that these rates are going up, right? When we should have been proactive instead of reactive.
Yes.
Thanks for joining me today on the Viva La Vulva podcast. I am your host and internal medicine physician, Dr. Cara Quant. If you like this podcast, please let others know and subscribe. Also, if you want to hear more information about what's happening with Viva La Vulva, hop over to our website at vivalavulvala.org and sign up for our newsletter.